Reactive Training Systems.
Hey, what's up everyone? Ross Lepple here, Reactive Training Systems Assistant Coach. I got a subject I wanted to cover with you guys today, and that subject is what a lifter should aim to go up by on a week-to-week basis as they progress through a program. I think maybe before we get into those exact numbers, one key concept that I want y'all to understand here too is that whatever the given protocol is for that particular week, whether it's a by 3 at 8, a by 1 at 8, by 8 at 8, whatever it is, whatever the RPE protocol is, we want to aim to be within half an RPE of that protocol. So if the protocol is at an 8, then we want to be between 7.5 and 8.5. If it doesn't land inside that parameter, if it's less, we want to put a little more weight on the bar and redo the set. If it's more, there's a lesson we need to learn in that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that specific instance in a minute. So a way that I look to go up week to week is basically looking back to the previous week. So if I'm on week 2 and I'm trying to decide where I might want to aim or where my target ought to be for today's working set, say it's a single at an 8, I'll look back to the previous week and I will see that, oh, maybe last week I did 230 kilos for a single at a 7.5. Cool, it was a good week, it's a good start. So because it was half an RPE under, I'm gonna aim to increase this week by about 1.5, 2% of that. If last week was at the prescribed protocol and it was at an 8, then I'm gonna look to this week increase by maybe about 0.5% to a full percent. If last week I was over by half an RPE, then I'm gonna look to retake that weight and do a better job execution-wise, reduce the RPE and just make that set better. Instead of it being an 8.5, I'm gonna make it an 8. If the set was higher than that, say it was a 9 or 9.5, then I really wanna be taking 2%, maybe even a little more off the bar and make sure that I'm dialed in and make sure that I'm really hitting that prescribed protocol with the by 1 at 8. I find a few reasons why it's important that we understand some of those key concepts. One, if we're consistently overreaching and we are out of that within half an RPE zone, it's going to add a bunch of extra stress and fatigue to the training session that is probably not intended to be there in the program. So if we're having a bunch of excess stress and work in the program during that week, then we're probably going to be overreaching our ability to recover. If we're overreaching our ability to recover, obviously there's all kinds of things that can go wrong there. It can lead to injury, it can lead to a stalled out training block, lack of progress, all kinds of things. Our big goal as powerlifters is always get more weight on the bar, So we might consider like, oh man, like that's such a low percentage, just put 1% on the bar each week. Dang, I wanna put 2% on the bar each week. The RPE might not dictate that weight is there, that it's justifiable to put that extra weight on the bar, right? So we need to stay within the RPE protocols, stay within those ranges that we wanna stay in, and not try and take big jumps and take big progressions. And the one reason why like these percentages, I have these recommendations on these percentages is a lot of times, pretty much every time I see somebody that has a big spike, it's always followed by a big dip. And if we just take that increment in that 1 to 2% range, instead of taking a big jump, we can avoid that dip. And if we avoid that dip, we can just have a nice steady increase across that training block without having any of that state of overreaching, without having any excess fatigue, without that shock of that extra high load compared to what it was the week before. Yes, there's exceptions to every instance, right? Week 1 started off poorly, lack of sleep. Now week 2, I'm really fresh. Or maybe there was week 2, I wasn't really fresh and I slept like crap. And now week 3, I'm really ready to go. So the circumstances are considerably different. That does play into weight selection, and that might bump you a little bit outside of those general parameters as far as like the 1 to 2% increase, things of that nature. Stick to the protocol, avoid the overreaching. Try to avoid too excessive big a swing, especially if we're creeping up on 3-5%. Like that's a pretty big swing to be happening week to week. So we want to try and control that a little bit, because at the end of the day, it's not about that necessarily specific week. It's about stacking up those wins across that entire block. And if we can stack up the wins across those entire blocks, that's way better, especially if the block 6 weeks. It's better to stack up wins across 6 weeks, 1.5%, 2% wins across each week, than have a 3%, 4% spike followed by a 2% drop. Like, it's just, the math lines out better to do it to take those nice small incremental steps along the way. The other thing to consider with that too, then, the maximum load that we're capable of lifting is sub 200 kilos or even sub 100 kilos, things of that nature. We really ought to consider probably keeping some fractional plates on hand so that we can micro load that lift and do that accordingly. Because, if we're sub 100 kilos and we're trying to add on 2.5 kilos, it's going to do us a huge favor if we can train next week at, say 56 kilos and then 56.5 or 57, instead of having to go from 55 to 57.5. It can make a considerable difference in the long-term progress of the lifter. So hopefully that information is helpful for you and you can go out there and get some more gains. Happy training.
So we recently revamped RTS Classroom. All the lessons are going to be new and freshly recorded. My main goal for revamping the class is to get into the emerging strategies content right away. So rather than save it for an advanced class later, I wanted to get into emerging strategies right from the first lesson series. So if you're not familiar with RTS Classroom, think of it like an online seminar. It's just extended. So a classroom is 10 lessons that are spread over the course of 3 months. There's online discussion as well, and it allows us to get into a lot more depth than you would be able to get with a standard seminar. Now we're going to be teaching this about emerging strategies, and we hope to be able to get into a lot more depth on this topic as well. So the first class is going to be Emerging Strategies Framework. So if you've never had an Emerging Strategies class before, that's where you'll start. And Emerging Strategies Framework is going to cover things like how to set up your first development block, how to set up a subsequent development block, pivot blocks, maintenance cycles, peaking for competition, block reviews, understanding block reviews, and how to conduct that whole process. And then we'll get into more and more advanced classes from there. But we want to get into emerging strategies stuff right away. So my goals are to teach you actionable things that are practical and useful, things that you can apply to your training pretty much right away. We want to get into a lot of depth, more depth on emerging strategies than we have anywhere else. And we want to teach you how to individualize training. This is about a process that you can use to individualize training. We know that it's a thing that you have to do, but in general, there's no process, there's no teaching of how to arrive at an individualized training program. And I think that's a problem if we're just relying on people's intuitive ability to pluck it out of thin air. I have my doubts. So what emerging strategies is to me is this process of systematically figuring out what works best for the athlete and zeroing in on that and allowing their ideal training plan to emerge. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, we'll make sure to put a link up wherever you're watching this. And if you don't see a link, you can always go to reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on store in the main menu, and navigating to classroom should be pretty easy from there. But it's the Emerging Strategies class, and hope to see you there.
Reactive Training Systems.